All right, hello everyone, and welcome to our classification of life video. So this video is going to start the notes for Unit 2. So let's start off with the characteristics of life. All living things have to have these characteristics in order for us to classify them as living. Now, if you were to Google this, characteristics of life, you would see different websites having different amounts of these characteristics that they think are true. Some websites group certain ones together, some websites add extra. So don't panic if you get on Google and see more or less than this list. I want us to focus just on the list that I provide you. So the first thing, all living things have to be made of cells. If they're not made of cells, they cannot be living. Cells are the basic unit of structure for life. So you have to have at least one cell, which we would call unicellular, or multiple cells, multicellular. And this part about cellular organization, that means that cells, let's take humans for example, cells can create tissues, tissues can create organs, organs can then create organ systems, and those organ systems then create us. So there's a lot of steps that get us to where we are, but the baseline of it is cells. The next characteristic of life is that you have to be able to acquire and use energy. So, this is things like metabolism. Think about photosynthesis. It's how we take in energy and how we're able to use that energy. One of the most obvious ones would be reproduction. So, all living things have to be able to reproduce. And this also includes cells that maybe reproduce asexually, or think about starfish. They're able to regenerate their arm by a form of asexual reproduction. All living things have to be able to grow and develop, which that one's pretty self-explanatory. All living things have to be able to respond to stimuli. So think about if you put a plant in a window, it's going to grow towards that window so it can get the most sunlight. You could also think about how we respond to stimuli. If somebody goes to pretend to punch you, you're going to flinch. That's your body responding to stimuli. Cells do this too. Another one is heredity. So we have to be able to pass down genetic information to our offspring. We reproduce and we pass down our genetic information to our babies. Plants have genetic information that they are able to pass down through pollen and different things like that. Living things have to maintain homeostasis. So, homeostasis, in my mind, is our steady state. So, think about when you're just sitting comfortably. That's your body in homeostasis. If you start working out, you start sweating. Your body's trying to go back to that original state where you're most comfortable. You could also think about how maybe your dog sheds a lot of fur in the winter or in the summer, and its coat thickens up in the winter. That's your dog trying to maintain its most comfortable body state. Okay, let's get into the classification of living things. So this is how we can ways that we can classify living things. The first way that we already kind of talked about is the type of cellular organization. So is it unicellular or multicellular? Another way is by if it contains a backbone or not. So vertebrae or an invertebrate. The main way is through what type, how that organism produces or uses energy. So autotrophs produce their own energy. An example would be photoautotrophs. They convert light energy to chemical energy. Another example is chemoautotrophs. They're able to convert one form of chemical energy to another form. Then we have heterotrophs. These are organisms that obtain energy from another organism. So when you eat another organism, say you have a big piece of steak, that's you technically ingesting another organism. You're getting energy from that organism. You can also be adsorptive, which means you secrete enzymes to digest food outside of the body and then absorb nutrients. When I think about absorptive, I think about like fungi. So they technically are obtaining their energy from other organisms, but they're doing it outside of themselves. and absorbing those nutrients. Another way that we classify living things is based on their symmetry. So there are three types of symmetry. There's lateral, bilateral, and asymmetrical. And I'm going to show you a picture in a second so you can see what that looks like. But radial, sorry, is the body is orientated so that it radiates out from an imaginary line through the center of the organism. So anywhere that we draw in this organism, it's going to look the same. Bilateral is that it can only be split in half into a left and right side, and that those sides are mirror images. So we have bilateral symmetry. This little goat has bilateral symmetry. Finally, we have asymmetrical. So this is that you don't really have any type of symmetry. So this thing, for example, looks like maybe a sponge or a coral. Anywhere we cut this, it's not going to be the same. Okay, so we can also classify things. This is how one of the main ways when you talk about like phylogenetic trees, which we'll get to at the end of this unit. This is the main way that we classify living things. We start with these two base ideas and go from there. So the first one is eukaryotes. That means that you have a nucleus, you have membrane-bound organelles, you're multicellular or unicellular, and you have multiple linear chromosomes or strands of DNA. So our cells in our body are eukaryotes. And almost all other living things that you might think of, like your dog, your cat, a horse, a bug, those are all eukaryotes. Prokaryotes are things that I should specify. These are types of cells. We technically are made of eukaryotic cells, but we're not a eukaryote. We don't say that. Okay, so eukaryotic cells, no nucleus, no membrane-bound organelles, always unicellular. That's the main thing. And then they have circular chromosomes instead of linear. So these are just a little diagram. Feel free to draw this if you want to. It might help you when we get to Unit 5 with cells. So like I said, it really helps us when we start dividing our phylogenetic trees, which is essentially the lineages of how species came to be. So we have prokaryotes that split into these two main categories, bacteria and archaea. And then there are eukaryotes, and that's pretty much everything else that you might think of. And these domains then are broken down even further, and we'll be able to see every type of living thing that could possibly be and where they came from. And that concludes our video. So the next video, you will dive into the kingdoms. Specifically, we're going to talk mostly about the eukaryote kingdom, but we will get a little bit into the prokaryotic kingdom.